Hello everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. Next Generation Analysts for Next Generation Threats. Lessons from deploying best practices to hundreds of SOC teams. Sponsored by Siemplify. My name is Carol, author of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are John Pescatori, SANS Director of Emerging Security Trends, and Meni Har, VP of Product at Siemplify. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to John.
Okay, thanks Carol, and welcome everyone. I'm John Pescatori with SANS. Welcome to another of continuing series of webinars we do here at SANS. Over the years, SANS has realized that everybody in security needs mixtures of people, processes, and technologies to get the job done and reduce the damage attacks do to businesses and enable businesses to do the new things securely that they need to do. And so bringing together the SANS community who attend our training courses and learn about security processes and techniques with the vendor community who provide those security technologies that make up the security controls you're going to deploy is very key. And it's key to have a two-way conversation. Both you hear about the capabilities from the vendor community and you guys out there in the audience give them the feedback they need to make sure they're building things you want. So today we're going to focus on sort of enhancing the ability of security analysts to deal with both today's threats and threats coming in the future, and we'll be talking about security operations centers and orchestration and improving processes and maturity and all that. Let me give you an idea of sort of what we're going to go through with the obligatory agenda. I'll sort of set the table here and give an overview and some results from last year's SANS Incident Response Survey and some other data. Every year I try to mine all the different data sources that come out around security so we can have some numbers, some quantifiable data to both make good decisions and convince management when we need to convince them what we need. And then Meni Har from Siemplify will come on, give you their view, and also do a demo of some of their capabilities around the orchestration area. As Carol mentioned, we'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions and answers, but also as we go along, I want to emphasize, enter questions as we go along. I'll try to monitor the questions window, especially when Meni's doing the demo. So if there's something you'd like to see him do or focus on in the demo, we'll be able to address that real time. Other than that, we'll try to get to any other questions at the end. If you are watching a recorded version of this, at the very end I'll give you an email address where you can send your questions and we'll get the right answers to you later on. Okay, with that, let's get started. So I always like to start with my simple risk equation because I think a lot of times sort of risk management and risk estimation and security gets turned into this complex discipline that really doesn't help us make better decisions or faster action. So the simple equation is, in order for there to be a risk, there has to be a threat. We've got those, and those are constantly changing. There has to be vulnerabilities. Actually, last year was sort of a year where the vulnerability count actually decreased, but there are still plenty of new vulnerabilities in Windows and every other piece of software out there that we know those are always going to happen. So we're always going to have some level of risk, but unless there's some action, bad guys taking action to launch those threats against those vulnerabilities, nothing happens. There's been threats and vulnerabilities we've known about for 20 years that only recently, whether it's DNS-related threats or using domain name services to exfiltrate data, there's all kinds of things that we're known to do and how to do them, and the vulnerabilities exist, but until the bad guys took their action, we didn't end up with that positive risk. Now there's also the negative action on that equation, which is what we do, the action we can take to mitigate those vulnerabilities, to prevent those risks from being realized, or as a minimum, detecting faster when an incident begins to start. Because the real key thing is we have to keep changing the actions we take. The threats do change. The delivery mechanisms the bad guys use to deliver the threats or exfiltrate data or cause denial of service change, and we have to adapt our actions. And more critically, we really have to focus on the aspect of, can we prove we're reducing business impact? Obviously, reducing aperture angle and preventing more attacks is the most cost-effective way of doing that, but that only goes so far. More quickly detecting attacks in process and more surgically mitigating them are very key to reducing impact, and we'll go through some of the numbers around that as well. There's a quote up there that comes out of the crisis management world, and if you think about it, last year Alan Paller and I of SANS, we did a series of CISO hot topic sessions focusing on what boards of directors and CEOs wanted to hear from security teams and what they weren't hearing. And what's very key was hearing about that connection to the business, being able to demonstrate what we do in security is having a positive impact on the business. They know things go wrong at the top levels, at the C-suite and at the boards of directors. They have business unit managers coming to them all the time with bad stuff happening, or engineering teams that bad ignition key designs in GM cars, or cheating in Volkswagen software cost the company billions. They know bad things are going to happen. They want to know from people with C in their titles that they have strategies and tactics in place to recover quickly and make sure the same bad thing doesn't happen again. So that's where we sort of focus on the damage prevention side of things. Okay, we prevented as many bad things as possible, but the key is reducing the damage to the bad things that do happen. In the security world, sort of the two very high-level metrics, obviously, that translates to is faster reaction, or faster detection of bad things starting to happen on the inside, more quick containment, but also more accurate containment and mitigation. If the answer is always, let's pull the plug, we have to disconnect from the internet, and that causes huge damage every time, when maybe we could have isolated one machine or one subnet, or maybe not even had isolate or interrupt business at all to mitigate. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of situation awareness that if we had better views into the problem, we could make those better decisions. There's starting to be some data come around that we can sort of back up this. People who can make faster decisions, faster identification of incidents, and faster mitigation are saving their company money. This comes from last year's Ponemon Cost of a Data Breach survey, which has all kinds of numbers in them. It's not really that big a fan of the methodology, but since it's done the same way every year, it's consistent. And what this shows is, in their case, the average time to detect an incident was about 100 days. I'll show you some data from the SANS community, which is much faster than that, but this is typical of sort of a broad and lots of small businesses included. And this shows that the average cost of an incident for people that were above the average was $4.38 million. For those that were below the average was over $1 million less, $3.23 million. So it's sort of very simplistic. We can show, on average, you can reduce the cost of an incident by 25%, or in this data about $1 million, by moving simply from above average to below average in detection. And similarly, same level of cost reduction shown from the Ponemon data on time to mitigate. In this case, you see that the time to contain or mitigate was about 30 days here, and by reducing that from above average to below average, another $1 million in saving. This is the type of information that management is looking to see out of us, that, yep, here's what it used to take us to detect things. We got the security investment in people, process, and technology, and here's the improvements. It can't always be, okay, now we need more. We have to be able to show those improvements and focus on the right things to get those improvements. Now, in the real world, we're not going to get all the security people we want. We're not going to get all the training dollars we want to up the skills of those people, and we're not going to get all the procurement budgets we want for every possible security technology out there. So it's key that we sort of look for what I call the force multipliers, sort of using an old military term, which is, if you can't remove the resistance, get a bigger lever to magnify the force you have to deal with that resistance. So the first side of that, the first aspect of that, is focus on the highest payback areas, the areas that can are most directly related to real-world threats, and that's certainly typified by the critical security controls effort that SANS has been a big backer in over the years. But the next level is then to say, okay, within the things I can do that'll most impact real-world threats, how do I get my biggest bang for the buck? Well, certainly one really critical way is that you look to mature your processes, have repeatable processes, documented processes, playbooks, and the like, so that the people, the process, and technology can attack problems efficiently each time, and it's not discovering a new way to do things or having incomplete information or a patchwork view into problems every time. So the real goal is to look for that mixture of the skills in the people and the capabilities of the technologies and security controls we glue together to get a good level of situation awareness, to know the real state of the threats against me, the vulnerabilities I have, and then be able to more quickly take action from that view. It's very different from sort of the view of let's just log things and we'll do log management and the like and be able to report for compliance purposes or backwards looking purposes. We're really talking about situation awareness, connecting all these various sources of information and the smart people to make the best decisions and turn that into action. And again, three aspects of action. Prevent more. Bottom line is there's a whole lot of attacks that could have been easily prevented if we knew the true status of our vulnerabilities and the true capabilities we had in the defensive side of SOC operations or security controls. Things will get through. We all know bad things are going to be happening. They've been happening in security forever. And the successful companies are the ones that can detect them faster to minimize the number of resources involved or records involved and essentially reduce the damage to the company. And as I mentioned before, make sure the security answer is not worse or even as bad as the problem. The way we mitigate, the way we contain has to be done more surgically. And a lot of people are doing it out there by taking advantage of better processes and better controls and technologies. So Security Operations Center is sort of one of those common denominators across the years working at Gartner for almost 14 years and here 4 years at SANS. It's almost a common denominator every time when you start saying, well, why did this company not show up in the news for a breach or ransomware hit? And this company that's in their same industry and about the same size and spends about the same amount of money, why did they? It's almost invariably the presence of a SOC or the maturity of a SOC. That's that common denominator. And the only reason I put this definition up here is to highlight the key way a SOC has to be measured is it reducing business damage? It's not producing reports or pictures of buildings where the attackers live or that. It's does it result in measurable reduction in business damage due to cybersecurity incidents? And there's a number of ways that can be measured. One way is not simply by counting up how much we spent on security or how many products we threw at the problem. So quite often you see something that looks like this when people point to their SOC, a bunch of products implementing defense in depth and spewing logs out there in the right and a bunch of reports coming out about all the attacks that were logged or blocked. Well, that's sort of a basic need, but that's not a SOC. That's not the ability, feeding the ability to respond. That's not feeding the ability to have situation awareness to make the right decisions. There's a lot of feedback that needs to happen between those arrows heading off to the right and back into those controls or back to the people, and there's a lot of white space between the people and the controls and between the people and the people that need to be filled in either by processes and hopefully by tools that can help speed up those processes and make those processes more repeatable. So last year, I think for several years now, SANS has done an incident response survey that has a lot of questions about incident response and SOCs to the SANS community. This is from the 2016 version. And there we asked, what do you feel the maturity level of your SOC is? So you see in the SANS community, it's about equal between those that feel they have an immature SOC capability and those who feel they're in the maturing stage, and only about 15% that think they've fully reached maturity. That's a pretty healthy attitude, right? That's the understanding that our SOC, we have a room, we have a diagram, we have people, we don't necessarily have repeatable processes, we haven't necessarily filled those white spaces with the connections that are needed, but over a third are in process of doing that. And SANS has had a SOC summit past couple of years. We'll have it again in June, and it's been a great place to see the various companies and people out there in the SANS community, all the things they are doing to mature their SOC capabilities and demonstrate the payoff to management. So those two key metrics I mentioned earlier I'll come back to. This is the time to detect and the time to mitigate. So here's the results from that SANS SOC or incident response survey from the SANS community, and it worked out to on the left set of bars there, that's the time to detect. That worked out to about average 2 to 7 days, roughly in the 3-day range, when you did the total weighted average to detect, versus, if you remember, it was 100 and the 100 days in the Verizon numbers, and I've seen even longer numbers than that in other surveys. Then you look at the time to restore operations, or time to remediate. That also worked out to about 2 to 7 days, closer to the 7-day side on remediation, which is actually pretty fast, especially when you consider servers. And you can see in the data, if you look at that orange bar to the left of the blue, to the right of the blue bar on the time to remediation, that's the 8 to 30-day range. That's much more typical when server-side incidents are involved. But the bottom line, those are two very key numbers to be able to measure, and those are two very key numbers to show improvement in. Essentially, moving those bars to the left on the shorter end of the time scale there. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can try to move that bar to the left, given the resources we have. What will make the most movement? What will give us the bang for the buck to do that? And for every investment, whether it's in training or in controls or in increased rigor or processes, whatever, how do we demonstrate the business benefits? How do we show two things? One is that caused improvements in these metrics, and that those metrics connected to things the business is measuring. Another thing we asked was, what obstacles are there out there as you try to improve your SOC processes and mature your SOC operations? Number one in pretty much every list of obstacles you see up there is staffing and skills shortages. In digging into this since I've been at SANS, despite what you see in the press, I think the bigger issue is the skills shortages, not really the actual manpower. The reality is, we're not going to double the number of people in everybody's security team. Companies don't have the budgets to just double security staff, or to bring in twice as many outside contractors to do the work if you're in the government world. It really is a matter of, with the staff we have, with some reasonable increase, how do we increase the productivity of the people we have? How do we take our security unicorns, the ones who are really good and really skilled, let them work on the important things, and enable younger or more junior or lesser skilled analysts and security operations people take advantage of that force multiplication. So within the bounds of staffing, how do we up our skills and sort of multiply the skills and the people we do have? There's also sort of two other areas you see whenever you look at these obstacles: lack of visibility, and that's those sort of technology controls and what I called earlier crossing the white spaces, the controls and the tools to connect the information that is available in various silos or coming out of the things and turn those into actionable information is really key. Now you see a lot of governance things that come up in there, lack of IT operations doesn't work with us, or we have silos of information and so on. But the real answer, when you look at the very top obstacles, certainly that first one, the staffing and skill shortage, the answer to that, again, is not simply, well, we'll just keep asking to double the security staff. It's really looking at ways we can multiply the effectiveness and the efficiency of the staffs we have, and hopefully get some reasonable increases in the staff. So there's a lot of ways I've looked at various CISOs and SOC managers showing benefit. There certainly is a return on investment view, which says we were able to reduce the cost the business saw due to these impacts. One very key area I've seen be very successful is most help desks have some sort of metric where if something happens or they want to do something to reduce people installing software on their machines or password reset, they're able to show direct reductions in help desk costs. So the help desk, the IT ops, are often the ones repaving all the machines that get impacted. By reducing the number of machines that get impacted, the help desk costs go down. It's a very easy way to tie into some very straight return on investment metrics. But there's also other areas. Many companies want to be able to bring on third-party business partners faster, show how they can get new products to market faster. So there's a lot of ways showing SOC improvement in reducing time to detect enables the business to move faster. If you're lucky enough to be in manufacturing or somewhere measuring uptime, showing how the security percentage of downtime is decreasing is a great one as well. And then, of course, whether it's the payment card industry or the government world or HIPAA in the healthcare world, SOC processes that are automated, that are orchestrated, that are mature, check off 80% of the boxes the auditors have to check off in all of those regimes. And of course, your friend is always an audit result that points out you need to make these, move up the maturity cycle and use that to justify getting these increases, again, in people, process, and technology. But the answer is just not saying, well, here's what we can measure. It's not real good data, but that's the only thing we can measure. That doesn't go over anymore. So bottom line, before I turn it over to Manny, the key to increasing security, to reducing business damage, is a real live and maturing SOC capability. The way to convince management to do that is to be able to show improvement in those key metrics. You got to start from a realistic starting point. You got to show, realize it's that mix of people, processes, and technologies. We're not going to say we can just bring in tools and get rid of those smart security people, nor are we going to say just by throwing more people at the problem we can solve the problem either way. And sort of one note from things I showed earlier, things I've looked at, logging events is not a SOC. Incident response alone is not a SOC. A SOC is an integrated combination of cyber operations to defend, incident response to quickly detect, and closing the circle to learn the lessons, to not do the right thing again. And it's all the playbooks and orchestration and automation that makes that efficient and get more efficient over time. So with that as sort of a baseline, let me turn it over to Manny from Siemplify, and we'll get their view and again go to a demo. Over to you, Manny.
Hey, just want to make sure you guys can hear me. Okay, great. Great. So first of all, thanks a lot for John to kind of his insight. I think that kind of leads us to a lot of what we're about to talk about. Before I kind of drill down into kind of where we came to be and kind of tell the story of why we do what we do and then what it is that we're doing, I just want to talk about myself a bit. So I am Manny Ahar, the Vice President of Product for Siemplify. And myself, as well as most of the leaders in the company, came from the field of training security analysts. So my initial background is from the IDF, where I was the captain and led security operations for one of the commands. And I actually met the founders of the company in a defense contractor in Israel, where we actually built training simulator for security analysts. And as we did this, we actually got to build SOCs and train security analysts across a lot of different industries, a lot of different sizes of companies. And I think what we've seen, what this team kind of led us to building this company and making the product the way it really is. And if I were to talk about kind of what we've been seeing, so first of all, what we're seeing is a lot of different alerts coming in. There's a lot of alerts, a lot of correlations. Look, even if you have a SIM, there's still going to be a lot of correlations that come in. There is going to be a large amount of false positives. If you look at some research you can find online, we have actually found that within the SOCs we work, 30 to 40% of cases being handled by analysts are actually repetitive. And the lack of context, the lack of tools kind of makes them be able to not know it and kind of lose a lot of their time on handling redundant tasks, not even knowing that they're doing it. And even if they do know, there's not much for them to do. And essentially, if we talk some of the trainings, what we've seen a lot of the times, if you give people two separate incidents that are related in very, very clear ways, they will always not have the tools to understand or deprioritize the ones that are similar just because there's not enough context to understand that. And if you're going behind that and trying to investigate a specific incident, the way people investigate today, the way people look at different tools, just makes it very impossible to analysts, especially unexperienced ones, to get to the root cause, investigate, and they lose precious times, and a lot of the time also focus on the thing they shouldn't have. And to kind of even take it from there, as we kind of talked about analysts as well, it is clear, kind of as John just mentioned, there is a huge shortage. And I kind of agree with John. It might not be about the size of the team. It's about the people on the team itself. And we have got to a point where the unemployment rate is definitely zero. I think any capable SOC analyst will find a job very quickly. And I think a lot of the times, even the analysts that come in are not going to be the experience that you want them to be, and definitely not going to be as capable with the tools that you have as you probably want them to be. And to kind of talk about some of what we've seen in training, a lot of the time we've come into training people who are students. And it's like off time is kind of have shifts on the SOC. And this is kind of ridiculous in a lot of ways because these are guys that are actually looking at the alerts. If you put all the advancements and eventually who's looking at these cases, looking at these incidents that come up, somebody who cannot understand them, who doesn't have the experience to understand, and not the right tools to help them understand, a lot of the time you're kind of defeating the entire purpose. And we've seen this happening over and over again. So, and maybe even I would add that even bigger teams, the problem does not get solved linearly by just adding analysts. At some point, that doesn't work anymore. And there needs to be something else to help the analysts there, and it's something that is clear to us. eventually, John mentioned that as well, it's about understanding the context. It's not just about looking at the logs coming from a security tool and just making a decision. It's much more than that. There's context to be had. What is this host? What is this IP? What is its background? What insights can you get on that? And all these different data silos and different tools that are deployed within the organization are definitely not something that are in front of the analyst in a comfortable way to help them make informed decision. That makes two options. Either the analysts make a decision without being completely informed, which definitely hurts their way to prioritize and make better assessments, or they're actually being cumbersome to go through different tools and make decisions on informed data, but very, very slowly. And we understand that the lack of context is actually hurting analysts everywhere, and a lot of the times making them do their job in a much, much poorer way. And the other thing we've seen is a lot of the times the processes are definitely not clear. So we've seen security teams that come in, and as we kind of show them an incident, train them, kind of create an incident for them and let them handle it through their common tools, a lot of times they do not actually know what they should be doing. And the first step of this training exercise usually starts with a 30-minute discussion of what should be done, or how this should be handled, what tools should be used. And this obviously is not something that can happen because those discussions don't happen every time. And those discussions are usually not very, very fruitful. So defining processes and even adding automation to our processes is something that's critical for today's SOCs and security analysts pretty much across. And this is something that's very important to us as we kind of build the platform itself. And obviously from there you can talk about, and again John mentioned that, this is actually being translated into numbers. So you can see some of the states here, but you can also look back at what John just mentioned, and all these stats that John just kind of brought out are actually current. So what we've seen here is what we built the company about 2 years ago. But if you look at research published a month ago, these are still the numbers. The problems are still there. They're not solved yet. And this is our purpose, to help you solve them. And to talk about what we do more clearly, we are built a tool that is meant for the analyst. And I think that was what we seen as the kind of the best obstacle and the greatest obstacle for security teams. I think we've spent a lot of years building sensors, excellent sensors. We needed them. We have spent a lot of years building silos. It starts with asset management, and now it's threat intelligence, another silo. And we've spent very little time helping analysts making sense of all this. I don't think it's actually a tool meant for the analysts, and that is what Siemplify, what Threat Nexus is all about. A tool to help analysts do their job and do it in a better way. And to be more clearly, we call ourselves security orchestration platform. But I will talk about in a second how our definition of orchestration is actually much wider than the one you typically see. But for us, it is clear there needs to be a platform for the analyst, a single pane of glass for him to be able to kind of go through these processes and make informed decisions and do it a better way, faster and better. And I think that we'll see that in a second as we bring in the demo and talk about how we actually do this. We want a single pane of glass to help you manage, investigate, and automate the entire process of responding across all your existing infrastructure. We want something that's built on context. So our entire system is built on the core of a graph ontology. So we have our own proprietary ontology that translates all your disparate tools into a single language that can be easily understood, investigated, and kind of acted upon. And we'll see that in a second. We are tightly integrated to your infrastructure. We connect to all the different tools regardless of what you have. We can support small organizations who typically just have a SIEM, maybe an Active Directory, to anything large that has any set of tools you can think about, from an EDR to anything more than that. We'll see that in a slide in a second. And again, the idea is to help you respond within a single pane of glass using both automation and the manual process and bringing it into a single pane of glass. That is what makes us unique. And when we say orchestration, let's just be on the slide here. What we actually mean before we even talk about kind of the use cases themselves is, and this is a bit more technical audience, so maybe I'll spend a minute to talk about how exactly we work. We connect to all your existing tools. So we connect to your SIEM. We support all of the major SIEMs. We connect to business and IT context, tools like IDMs, Active Directory, asset management, GRC solutions to provide business and IT context. We also connect to your security silos, threat intelligence, vulnerability, web intelligence tools, and we also add those to the SIEM alert as they come in to help you identify and build a real-time graph or a contextual graph of what's actually going on within your organization currently. This helps us bring context to the actual incidents as they come in real time. That also allows us, as part of the process you're dealing with the different incidents, and we'll see that again in a second, also connect to any existing tools to make better use of them for investigation purposes, for automation purposes, and for response purposes. And all this happens with a single fabric, a single infrastructure that supports all of it. To go back to our definition of orchestration, so there's a little bit of confusion in the market. It's very important for us to demonstrate this. So a lot of the times when we talk about orchestration, we kind of have equal automation. People have this confusion that orchestration is automation. In our view, this is much wider than this. Orchestration is about the entire process, about the analyst themselves, not just the interface of the tools. And for us, that means the entire breadth we see here. It starts with the integration itself. I give a fabric that can connect to your existing infrastructure. The other is about the analytics themselves, how to bring everything, how to bring the context in, how to get all the information, how to properly prioritize the energy you're getting in a smart way, not by a static severity. How to look at the data science themselves and understand, by utilizing these techniques in noise reduction, what is actually more occurrences, what is more unique, and what you should actually look for first. And then start actually orchestrating the incidents. And that for us means the ability to manage, ticket, perform full-on management of the in the day-to-day incidents, help you investigate in a visual, intuitive, manual way, but then also help you to automate. And all this happens in a single pane of glass. And our purpose is to help you automate and investigate manually in a single pane of glass in a very seamless way. And as we go through the demonstration in a second, this will be very, very apparent. Okay, and maybe it's time for kind of go to the demonstration here. Let me just show my screen. Excellent. Let me just reduce this as well. So, as we mentioned, this is a tool meant for the analyst himself. This is what we are. This is a tool for the analyst. When we are installed with customers, and we have quite a few at this point, this becomes a day-to-day tool very, very quickly because it streamlines the entire operation. And the first screen you're seeing is the overall management. The idea is to give you visibility into your existing state live. That starts with what type of incidents are existing, the dwell times that are currently ongoing, analyst loads, types of products that are creating incidents, types of attacks that are going on, network visibility, and so on and so on. It's a customizable dashboard where you guys can build your own dashboard and make sure you see what actually matters to you. The complementary screen will be kind of the KPIs. I want to look back and understand where I am. And that's a lot of the metrics we just saw is something you automatically generate here. For example, what is a typical dwell time for phishing versus malware? For specific networks, tools, again, provide you visibility in exactly your processes are. Allow you to understand where you're weaker, what takes you longer, where you want to automate more, and also give you a tool that you can actually identify and report clear metrics to management and kind of have something that makes sense and can be repeated easily. And with that, let's go to the cases screen. So this is a day-to-day tool, again, used by your analysts. So in this, let me just click. In this specific instance, I'm an analyst called Alon, which is coincidentally also a VP R&D. And this is, again, I'm an analyst tool. I log into this screen. This is my workbench. So I currently have, as you see on the left side, is what we call the smart queue. I have 9 cases in my queue currently to handle. And you can see the colors on the left side is actually priorities. And you can see that I click on a specific incident here. Let's call this one data leakage. That's how we classify it. You see that this incident actually has 3 different icons associated with this. What does that mean? So let's talk about the graph again, right? We talked about how we build the graph from all the incoming correlations in the SIM and the different contextual data we can provide as well. And by using this graph, this allows us to cluster together separate incident into one storyline. So by using the graph and kind of understanding the underlying context, we're actually being able to take 3 different correlations happening in the SIM and contextualize into a single storyline. The underlying issue for us is we do not want analysts to look at logs or text. We want them to understand a story. Sometimes the story will be very simple. It could be a single alert. Sometimes it could be more complex. The idea is to have a single pane of glass to understand it in a better way. And you can see this story comprised of 3 different, what we call indicators. One is a blacklist for threat intelligence, again, a correlation that happens within the SIM. Second is semantic endpoint protection and virus alert. And the third is strategic exfiltration attempts. All of these share a context. They are built into one storyline. You can see the story itself. On the right side, you can also see some of the information we have about the entities themselves. Who is this user? What is this credential level? What processes? Who is this manager? Anything you need to kind of understand the user. If it's a host, misconfigurations, vulnerabilities. What is OS? The business process it supports. If it's threat intelligence, we'll talk about threat intelligence in a second. We also provide the full context of threat intelligence as well. And the idea is that actually, as I'm an analyst, and I can now understand the flow, I can also understand the impact, and this helps me make informed decisions in a much better way. And aside from this, you can also look at the priority itself. So we run a lot of different algorithms to help you prioritize the incidents in the right way. This starts with the basic severity you get from SIMs, but it goes way, way beyond that. We look at the science of repetitive incidents. We're now being able to look at analyst feedbacks to deprioritize. This allows us to give priority in a way that's typically very hard to perform in the existing tools. And this way, just to recap, I actually am an analyst. I see a story in front of me. I see an impact or possible impact. I see a proper priority, I can now make informed decisions. And that decision can be many things. It can be to escalate to another member of the team. It can be to close the case as a false positive or something that's already been mitigated. Or it can actually be investigated further. And as I click the investigate button, that same story we just talked about appears to you visually. And when it appears visually, you can now kind of understand the story, even a complex story, in a much, much simpler way. Let's just flip the screen. Great. And this is kind of the story we just talked about, right? So on the left side, you see what we call the storyteller. It tells the story of an incident. And you can see the first one is actually a firewall, right? You see an internal IP. You know it's internal because it's blue. Through a firewall log to an external host. You know it's external because it's black. And the red outline also states that it's matched with threat intelligence as well. What does that mean? Let's talk about the graph again, right? So as we normalize everything into our graph, what we also normalize is threat intelligence, actual sticks objects. So we can connect to any threat intelligence platform or actual feeds and normalize those against the information coming from the incidents from the SIEM. Basically, this means we're actually providing information to the analyst of actionable threat intelligence as he does the day-to-day investigation. For example, some information may be relevant. So just to kind of talk about it, on the right side, we're seeing the actual sticks object associated with that same specific attack. And you can actually see who is the actor, who is the campaign. You can get relevant information. For example, other incidents where that my stock actually has faced that same campaign or actor, what he did back then. You can look at typical tools and techniques by that attacker, the recommended courses of action, the summary of that threat. You can also look at other observables used by that same attacker, so you can now search for them and make them actionable in a way that's very hard to do before. If you go back to the story, because I kind of want to get a lot in there, is you see I have AV alert on that same IP. Again, this is how we cluster together. And the third one is a user expectation attempts also connected to that same IP. And in this way, we've actually built a story that will be very hard to understand before, and we show them in a visual way that analysts can now understand in a way that's unparalleled, I think, in a lot of ways. And just by doing this, you get obviously the option of understanding the incident better, prioritizing in the right way, since we do basically the big picture, not a single log alert. And we can actually even take it to the next step by helping the analyst investigate as well, right? So it's something that John mentioned as well. We kind of want analysts to be able to investigate further. We see it as part of the typical problems within an existing SOC. We want to give an analyst a way to investigate across the existing tool sets and data they have within this single pane of glass, within our graph architecture. So we do this by using a feature called Sneak Peek. And this feature kind of lets you investigate across the different tools you have in your infrastructure within this single pane of glass. So let's look at maybe just talk about what we just did here, right? So we looked at a specific IP on the graph, and the question he just asked is, this specific IP we're just looking at, what action has been done through the blue code proxy logs, in this example, in Splunk? And now on the left side, you see the typical results. And again, these are all graph-based, right? We prepare into our ontology. So these are entities that you can actually drag into the graph and be able to pivot on top of them as well. And on the right side, you see a window that's more like a kayak or a Skyscanner filtering application. You can now start defining granularly what is the question you want to ask. What is the typical entities you want to see? What is the category website you want to look for? Again, this is by the blue code's proxy logs within Splunk. And this way you can start filtering and asking very granular, very well-informed questions and get very quickly re-answered to be able to use them in a single pane of glass as well. And we can talk about log repositories you can do this for, against a SIEM, against Splunk, against other log sources. But you could also run this against tools, against EDR solutions like a Carbon Black or Titanium or CrowdStrike, or network forensics tools like security analytics tools and that sorts. And the idea is to have a single pane of glass to be able to take all the information in, using our ontology, centralize it to a way that everything fits together, then also helps you investigate and pivot to the graph as well. And again, once you pivot, once you add an entity to the graph, obviously it's saved within the case, but you can also use that as a different pivot and continue to investigate. And this way, investigation is done in a much easier way to help you do that easily and more intuitively. Another step you can take, because we've kind of covered, again, this is a process of how we see responding threats being done. We started with management. We talked about triage and prioritization. We also talked about investigation. We can show that again by how we actually actionalize information about the endpoint as well. For example, this is vulnerability information brought from tools like Qualys or Nessus to help analysts understand, for example, the services running on that machine. For example, what are the vulnerabilities that exist on that specific machine? And as this is something that's going through our ontology, this doesn't end here. Everything here is not static. we can decide to take any one of these CVEs and drag that to the graph as well, and that becomes a pivot as well. So if you look at another tool like an EDR, this is our screen for RSA ECAT, for example, you can actually take a process that's currently running live on an endpoint. This is not from the log. This is from a live endpoint we're connecting to, and take a process that's insuspicious and drag that to the graph as well. And again, once it's on the graph, you can now ask other queries, match it against other sources. The idea is to investigate across the different sources, against the different tools you have, the different data sources you have, from a single pane of glass. And we've kind of covered a bit of the investigation part. But we can also talk about the way we mitigate and remediate. Since we connect to tools and we want to centralize the entire process, you can obviously do all the mitigation and remediation techniques you have from here as well. Mitigation can be anything from disabling accounts in AD, isolating machines through a network access control or an EDR, running any scripts you have. You kind of have a complete kind of scripting engine. We can add your own scripts and use them as part of the automation or manual workflow. We'll talk about the automation in a second. And we can also start remediation processes and track them. For example, we have customers who will open tickets for IT using tools like ServiceNow or Jira, and the system tracks the ticket, updates the analyst when the ticket is updated and closed. Essentially, we want to centralize the way you do remediation in the same way you kind of manage a case. That is what we're unique about. This is a platform, end-to-end platform for the core needs of a security analyst. And everything I've done up till now would be focused on the manual process. And I think it was apparent to show how we work and to think about the back end of what we're doing. But we are clear that at least some of these has to be automated as well, which is also why we have an automation engine built into this as well. And automation is a bit unique than what you see typically in the market. We do not focus on just full automation. It's not about getting case A and performing action 1 through 3. We support that, and we have customers use this, but this is typically just a small percentage of the use cases we have within customers. We also support full-on manual playbooks. There's a specific incident coming. What are the steps you want the analyst to track? If it's unexperienced, you want to have them guided through the process. And because we do the automation and the manual in the same pane of glass, you can also find a very good way to integrate both the automated actions and the manual playbook for the analyst, again, within the single pane of glass. I think that's what's unique. That's what we typically see our customers going. And I think very quickly when we install and deploy with a customer, most of their process become this mash of automating what we need to and then still leaving a manual playbook to kind of guide through the rest of it. So playbook for us, and you're actually looking at our orchestration screen, you can kind of drag and drop and build your workflows here. Anything you kind of want to go through. And we don't have a lot of time, so I kind of want to see an example of a specific workflow to talk about kind of an example of how we can use this. So this is a typical workflow we're running with an active customer. And let's go over this workflow easily, right? So very quickly. So this is a workflow. You see the yellow. The yellow is the trigger. What causes this workflow to start? This name is malware detected. This is actually a rule coming from the SIEM, from an underlining EPO or STEP solution. And if you kind of look through the flow here, with the first step we're doing is taking the hash identified by the endpoint protection tool and scan against our entire infrastructure using a tool like Tanium. But it can easily be Carbon Black or CrowdStrike and any other tools that expose that functionality. And the next step is actually a branch. And the branch asks a very simple question. If the malware was successfully deleted and I have not found any other instances of that hash, I just want to close the case. It's something that's already been mitigated. We have cases, we just want to remove the need of our analysts to actually look at it. And if it's not the case, now we want to start kind of initially mitigating this. So this is an action with Forescout. It can be for any EDR solution as well, to isolate the machine, change the VLAN, make sure it cannot communicate it out, essentially do the initial mitigation. And this is the point where we want to transition to our analyst. This is something that's been validated, something that's a real incident. The information the analyst needs to perform the investigation is already there. The initial mitigation has already happened, but now we want to shift it into the analyst perspective and start kind of running and make final decisions and act by the analysts themselves. So what we're seeing the shift here is we assign priority to this case. We assign the case to a specific analyst or a group. You can notify the analyst that it's being assigned, and then you can still have a set of tasks to be performed by the analyst once this case is open for him. And this way, we can actually bring the best of both the machine and the man. So basically, we have had, just to kind of talk about what we've seen here, we had a case that has been automatically validated by the workflow, automatically enriched by all the information the analyst needs to make these decisions, and even automatically mitigated. Before I go and see for a second how analysts perceive this, we can actually look at this small toggle that says A, and basically this is how you can easily switch between a manual action or a analyst supervised action to an automated one. So by flicking this trigger, this small switch, you can now decide whether this action is going to be something the analyst has to be okay with and basically click OK to make it work, or it is automated. And in this way, we can allow our customers to build a trust within this process. So they can start with a process that's completely analytic supervised. And as they build trust, as they be confident in it, you can now easily switch this to the automated method and get a fully automated or 80% automated, typically, process within the customer itself. This way, we can allow customers to build processes that make sense to them and have them have confidence in it to kind of use this in the day-to-day basis. Small thing I just talked about is how analysts would perceive this. So the same case as seen by the analyst, you can see that it's a malware incident. You can actually see the same worker we just talked about in the analyst perspective as well. The blue squares are actually squares that already happened. You can see the Tanium square. You can see the force scouting event. And again, as an analyst, I log in. Basically, what I'm seeing is a task for me to perform. Everything automatic we just covered already happened. The information is there. It's already been validated. Even mitigation has happened, but now it's up to me as an analyst to kind of make the decision and move on. And obviously, we haven't talked about it, and I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to be brief. You can actually audit everything you do. There's actually evidence log here to perform anything you do in terms of management within this single pane of glass as well. And again, I'm an analyst. Every information is already in front of me. I've validated the case. I know that it's already mitigated. It's time for me to make the final decision and act and notify and whatever it is I see the next steps is. And I can obviously go back to the investigation screen and kind of do what we talked about before, the pivoting, the investigation, and again, within the single pane of glass. And I think that's what makes it unique. That's what we call orchestration, that it's more than just automation. We provide support for the entire process. The automated one, the analyst-led one, and we have it in the single pane of glass to help you support any type of process you kind of have. And with this, maybe I'll go back to some of the slides.
Actually, Manny, why don't you stay in the demo here? I'll address some of the questions that came in. You might need to hit some places in the demo.
Sure.
Let me get the first one. So you've shown it sort of up and running, but what's involved, in getting going and what sort of administrative overhead and setup and getting everything integrated? How does that happen?
Excellent. So that's an excellent question. I think for us, and that's what's unique, there's no deployment here is not a network sensor to deploy. There's not an endpoint engine to install at all. Basically, the whole thing for us is wizard-driven. A deployment process for a typical customer or POC is no more than a day. It's basically about setting up the SIM you're connecting to. There may be some configuration in the SIM side. Then all of it is wizard-driven in how you add your own tools. So you have Carbon Black. Basically, select Carbon Black from our wizard, put the credential of that IP you need to kind of have the connection. And from that point on, Carbon Black is supported across the entire process. The idea for us is we understand it has to be simple. There needs to be little overhead to administrate, and I think we can get value out of this within a day. It's not a typical long deployment process at all. I hope that helps.
Okay. Now, say I'm going through that. I set up some of these stories or flows. Is there some way to test them before real data triggers them?
Yeah, so it's, actually we've had the request from multiple customers, definitely coming in the next version.
Okay. Let's see, I think it was in your dashboard slide you mentioned things like showing dwell time. How do you, is that collected from as an analyst goes through the steps and you're actually sort of keeping track of clock time across the whole process, or how do you collect numbers like dwell time?
So absolutely, I go through, since I centralize the entire process, I can make those calculations. So definitely, it's from the analyst process, some of the automated process as well. We have, as we can kind of look at all the contextual information, we can actually make a very educated dwell-time calculation based on any type of slice, like data slices you want to look for, as we have all the context. So yes, it is automatically calculated.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of different environments out there and architectures, way IT is run and distributed and types of systems. What's involved in sort of tuning this setup? So you mentioned adding the security products, but if I've got a virtualized environment over here and Unix over there and Windows over there, and how do I tune this for my environment?
So as a deployment itself, it's simple. So setting up the system is not an issue at all. Building the workflow is something that typically just two ways. Either your organization, you have some capability, you have some idea of what you want to do, and this is where you can use the workflow to kind of very dynamically build the process that supports any type of environment you have. And since we do not connect the logs, we do not connect to the actual environment, we don't really care if it's a Linux or Windows server. We just connect to the SIMs or the other data sources you already have in place and their APIs. And if it's something a small organization that needs help, we can actually have our own knowledge base. We have very experienced with building Sparks and their processes. We have quite a bank that you can use and leverage and kind of tune out and start with an existing product of existing set of use cases, and we can help you build that stuff. There's a lot of stuff we do for some of those smaller clients.
Okay. Let's see. You mentioned you what was I? Yeah, okay, I'll do this one. You mentioned you've got a bunch of existing customers. Is there sort of verticals that this fits better with that you've seen in your customer base, or larger security teams that get the biggest bang out of the orchestration, or is it smaller that get bigger bang for the buck, or what are you seeing in your customer base?
So this is the interesting piece. So there's two types of customers we actually see in the market. One is the bigger ones. They have 30 analysts. They can't scale up anymore. They kind of understand they need tools to support it. They have some other investments. We help them streamline. It's definitely a major vertical where this will typically be a larger organization. We have some of the Fortune companies we are dealing with as well. And it will be larger. It can be, you can typically say it might be the most financial, but definitely every vertical has this problem because SOC is something that's starting to be as common to any type of, even size, but definitely vertical companies in the market. But the other customer we're seeing is people who are now building their SOC and need a tool to center it around. So people that do not have any processes, they look at this kind of tool to help them build their process from scratch. So we have typically the medium organizations, even the small organizations that look at building a SOC around this tool. And you have the bigger ones that look at orchestrating the SOC a bit more, getting more of their existing investments, and that kind of covered a lot of the market we're seeing, which is a lot of the percentage of it.
All right, now since SIM products are quite often used as sort of a definitive logging source, you mentioned pulling information from SIMs. Did you mention something where you feed alerts into SIM, so where you've declared a number of events to be a case or a story or whatever you call it, do you then create an alert that's then fed into the SIM product that's in use?
No, so that's an important distinction. We are not a detection tool. We take the cases, correlations that happen in the SIM, and we then orchestrate the process of responding to them. We're not a detection tool like UBA that creates a new incident in the SIM. We kind of pipe on the existing correlations. We can cluster them together and build a story out of them. We're not meant to be the detection tool that creates the new incidents and identifies the APT. That's not our purpose.
Okay. Let's see, we had a question came in. Does your deployment model support both on-premises and cloud deployment?
Yeah, so the typical way we see customers, we support both. The typical customers we have usually go with virtual deployments, which is our preference as well. But we have some customers that are looking at Amazon deployments, for example, is something we support as well. Again, most customers we see are not quite comfortable with sending out information, especially SIM information, to the cloud, which is typically why it's on-premise, but we kind of support both.
Okay. And there's a question about the reporting capabilities. Specific question was, is there an option to extract the case data into some standard document format like PDF or something like that?
Yes. Yes, there is. I didn't want to include it for the lack of time, but actually every case here, not even here, I'm just going to the button itself. I can't even see it here. Every case here has a button that creates a report. Essentially, every case can be transferred into a report that includes all the actions in the case, all the workflow that happened, all the investigative notes. Yes, so everything is an automated option to create a report, a PDF report that can be sent to stakeholders. Even has sexy stuff like an image of the graph to get some sexiness into it. But yes, it's definitely an important feature we see used a lot by our customers.
Okay. Are there, as far as users, is there capabilities for multiple users, multi-tenancy, role-based access of the capabilities?
So let's differentiate this two. So in terms of role-based access, we have this permission model where you can actually decide which analyst can see which cases to kind of help you identify and segment the different cases from the different analysts, if that is the case you want to do. In terms of multi-tenancy, we see a huge, we haven't covered this at all, a huge kind of, we talked about the need for SOC analysts, the need for MSSPs, in a lot of ways even greater. So we actually are releasing a multi-tenant concept of that same product to help you support, help MSSP support multiple environments across multiple data sources, across and manage it from a single pane of glass. We're also looking at the data requirements and segmentation and everything like that. So definitely yes, we are working on and we will release shortly a multi-tenant version of that same concept.
Okay, and at the SOC level, is there, if I'm the SOC manager, the operations manager, do I have a view where I sort of get a dashboard or statistics on how my analysts are doing?
Yes, so we just covered some of the dashboards here. So the dashboard is customizable. As a manager, I can build any dashboard I want using all the context I have. So you can look at analyst loads currently. What are my analysts working with? You can even look back at their performance and understand who takes the longest with who specializes in any type of case. So definitely you can have any cut to understand your analysts better and your process better. That's typically what managers are looking to do, get visibility.
Okay, and then what's the pricing or licensing model? Is it per user, by volume of information, by number of resources tied in, or how's that work?
So we typically start to stay away from the like EPS type of pricing. So we typically size it by the size of the company. We have some models. It could be by the type of the endpoints, the type of users, something we discussed further with any willing customer. But it definitely is related to the size of the organization and not the data volume itself. That's key for us.
Okay, and for the typical Siemplify user, what's the sort of skill level that a user would need to bring to this?
Excellent. So this is a SOC platform. It means there's multiple levels of users who use it. So a manager, obviously, just needs to be able to look at it. Tier 1 analysts, typically what we have our customers doing is kind of working through workflows. So for them, they need to understand the story, the high-level story. They need to follow the tasks people set for them within the workflows themselves. It's kind of, a lot of the time, maybe they look at a glimpse of the graph to understand some visual notion. That's kind of what's the end. Then we have a second tier that gets the case assigned to them, and they can actually use the entire investigative purposes and mitigation purposes used for them. So it's basically how we differentiate. Also, tier 3 can use this for some more, although I can see them definitely leaving the tool for other things as well as a tier 3 does forensics. And eventually, someone who builds a workflow has to be a principal analyst. Maybe will be something much more experienced that can build the process and have those tier 1 follow it. So I think we try to adhere to any different type of analyst that exists and give them the tools that it's flexible enough and dynamic enough to support all of them. And that's kind of what we see with our customers.
Okay, and does the product come with sort of a base library of workflows that I can then customize or add new ones, or
Yes.
I just okay?
Absolutely, that's our background. We come from training SOCs. We have quite a few customers already, and quite a few of our own knowledge base, our own tools we've created to support any variety of tools we actually integrate to. So for the smaller customers, typically, because big ones usually have a better idea of what they want, we actually have a lot of use cases to help them support them and help them build them out with us.
Okay, I think we got time. One more question that came in here. The question is, can we add custom tags like tier 1 versus tier 2 levels of support?
Yeah, so you can do that by multiple ways. The typical one you can use is actually, you can definitely add different tags you see here. You can then filter by them, search by them, look for them, and also assign them and segment cases by them as well.
Okay, we're nearing the end, so why don't we flip back over to the slides and we'll close out.
Great. So I'm going to skip some slides. I think we covered a lot of it already. We talked about how it's easy to deploy, wizard-driven. You can see some of our wizard here. Some of the things we're seeing with customer. Just by clustering and looking at the repetitive events, we're looking at reduction of cases by about 80%. That's something we see for typical customers. Productivity for analysts, their ability to handle more information is triple. That's by having the automation in place, having the orchestration in place. Definitely in terms of the dwell time, the time it takes to respond, we're looking at a reduction of 70 to 80% just by utilizing the tool and have everything into this effective single pane of glass. And I think that's it for me. Also available for any questions. Feel free to reach out.
Okay, great. We hit all the questions that we did come in, and we're just about out of time, so I do want to leave you with some resources. There's the URL to find the archive version of this or all the other SANS archives actually for 2016 or now 2017. I mentioned the SANS SOC Summit that's focused all around the key areas of maturing and improving SOC processes and so on, and you see the URL there. It's June in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, I think it's Crystal City area this year. There's Siemplify's URL to get more information from them and about their products. If you are watching a recorded version of this, you can send, or if you just didn't get a question in time here, you can send your questions to q@sans.org and we'll get you answers via email from the right people. There's my Twitter handle if you want to follow me. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol for some final words.
All right, thank you so much, John and Many, for your great presentation, and to Siemplify for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Very much.